Well, hello. I think I'm getting a bit better at doing these lives. I seem to have done a few lately. Anyway, whenever you start watching, it'll be very nice to see you. And I'm going to be reading this evening from this beautiful, beautiful book, Inkcap and the Blight of the Bonnets by Kylie Dixon. Now, you probably know, many of you will know, that I'm an editor and a proofreader. That's my job. And a while ago, I had the pleasure of editing and proofreading this amazing book, all about the characters in the magical world of Mushroom Marvellous. And it's book 2. There's a book 1 as well called Inkcap and the Nethers. And a little while ago, Kylie asked me if I'd like to read this book. And I thought, well, I would love to read this book. So I'm going to start. I'm going to be reading it in instalments over the next few weeks, however long it takes for all the instalments, because look, it's a good-sized book. And I'll try and leave each one with you wondering what on earth's going to happen next, so that you'll come back next week and find out. Okay, so, hello Alexa, hello Kylie. Okay, I know there's someone watching. I shall begin. This book starts with a beautiful introduction, and you have to try and remember the introduction because it's relevant when we come back to the end. The world was spinning round and round, swirling and twirling so fast. The autumn shades of brown, orange and gold playfully frolicked through the air. It seemed safe, this whirling wheel of wonder, something familiar and kind and homely. Yet a shadow was looming, and the spinning grew sickly and icky. Then the autumn dance slowed, falling deeper, and everything was still and silent. It was raining in the garden again. The mushrooms had been hard at work during the 6th day of wet weather in the allotment. What seemed like a never-ending daily drizzly slog in the magical world of Mushroom Marvellous was finally taking its toll. Inkcap, positive as ever, made sure all tasks were kept within the polytunnel. The tunnel with its plastic domed covering protected wondrous vegetables from colder weather. It was a rare but exciting occurrence when work took place in the polytunnel. For this was where the Grumps' giant prized leeks were kept, ready for showing season. Looking after them really was a special task. There were precise instructions. Inkcap, the slim grey mushroom, stood tall amongst the other mushies. His wide white cap, full of glistening ink capsules, bobbled about as he gathered the little shrooms around the cabbage patch. "All right, my marvellous mushies, these are the last few to go." Inkcap pointed to the 3 light green squidgy critters chomping at the kale leaves. It had taken the mushrooms 4 days to carefully climb the dozens of frilly purple cabbages, plucking the pesky caterpillars away from their feast. A line had been formed from one end of the kale patch to the tunnel's entrance. Here, Scales acted as runner. He'd been rather puzzled when Inkcap gave him the one job he dreaded. It meant ferrying the baby caterpillars from one end of the mushroom line off into the garden to an unused soil bed at the foot of the scarecrow stand. "Oh, thank goodness," Scales puffed quietly from under his brown bulbous cap when Inkcap mentioned the final 3. "Who on earth gives a blushing wood mushroom a job like this?" He bumbled towards the end of the line for the final round of caterpillar chasing. Scales thought Inkcap hadn't heard, but Inkcap smirked, trying to hold his laugh in, just as he had after every sigh and every splutter from Scales over the last few days. Inkcap was well aware his best friend was neither the fastest nor the most active mushroom in the garden, and after all the extraordinary events of last summer in the magical world, Scales was still as stubborn as ever. Inkcap was always thinking of ways to make him realise how important he was to the allotment, especially if it created a little fun. When the clapsident had happened on that frightful day with the Nettle Army, Inkcap had been truly amazed by Scales. The world beneath the undergrowth had been filled with tales of Scales and Inkcap, the heroes of the garden who had saved the Grumps' pea pods. There were many feasts that went on for days. The mushrooms listened wide-eyed to their elders tell stories of brave Inkcap and Scales, how they'd conquered General Nixus and the nasty Nethers. Yet seasons had rolled by in the allotment. Lush green leaves had turned to burnt orange. Autumn rain had washed away the now distant memories of their past adventures. But not for quick-witted Inkcap. He kept that fearful feeling in the back of his mind that something would surely happen again. So he continued to test his friend at every opportunity. The final passing of the pesky caterpillars along the mushroom line was slower than before. They wriggled in protest with every prod and poke from brown velvety fingers and thumbs. Scales was now utterly exhausted. Still, he mustered the energy and made his last dash back to the polytunnel. But just before he reached the others, he slipped in a muddy puddle. Landing on his pudgy bottom, he cursed his 2 left feet. All the mushrooms burst into laughter as Scales sat there on the ground. He was covered in mud from mushy cap to mushy toe. The grump scarecrow stared at him in the background. "Oh, come on, Scales," Inkcap teased. He helped his friend out of the puddle, pulling at his chubby, muddy arms. "Only a bit of fun now." "It might be a bit of fun to you," Scales replied with an embarrassed red face, "but you're not the one who's been running about for 4 whole days in the wet and the mud. Why you thought I, Scales, the slow, stupid shroom, would be best placed as runner is a mystery." He pulled his arm from Inkcap's grasp as he struggled to his feet, scraping the mud from his skin. "When will you ever learn?" Inkcap said in a firm voice. "We all have a place in the garden. There is reason and logic in everything we do. You, my friend, still can't see how you're growing and learning every day." His voice softened as he added, "Even if it means you do have to do a bit of running and stumbling." He tried to hide another giggle. "Now come on, little fella. Let's get you back to the leap pot, where I have some steaming hot salt cup brewing for us." And off they trundled, through the sludge, back to Inkcap's house. It's hard to imagine, but inside Inkcap's plant pot house, it's dry and cosy and warm. The perfect place for little mushies to rest after a hard day's work. Through the cracked hole in the side of the plant pot, you'll find seats carved out of soil in the walls. Tables, shelves and benches are built from mini mud mounds, and in a corner is Inkcap's stove. The stove is cleverly built against the back corner wall of the house. It's heated by a steady stream of steam which flows down a thin plastic tube and up to an old copper coin balancing on the stove surface. "Is the salt cup ready?" said Scales. "I'm starving and wet and—" "Tired?" Inkcap finished. "Give it a stir then, little fella. I'll fetch the acorn cups. You'll soon be warmed through once I get this inside you." Salt cup was a favourite in the magical world of Mushroom Marvellous. It was a mixture of water, baking soda and salt, all, of course, sneakily taken from the many shelves in the tool shed at the back of the allotment. Inkcap passed a big cupful to Scales, who smiled as they both drank down the warm, salty liquid. It danced around their tired little bodies. Both mushrooms slowly plonked their bottoms down to rest, as each gulp made them feel more cosy and satisfied. "Oh," Scales sighed, resting his cap against the wall. "That's what I needed. There's nothing better than a steaming pot of salt cup at the end of a day's work." "Feeling better, are we?" Inkcap asked, returning the friendly smile. "I was always all right, you know," Scales replied. "Never too much work for Scales." Inkcap nodded and grinned. "Course you were," he said, eyes twinkling. "Never too much work for you, is there?" They sat for what seemed like hours, talking about the past week of activity in the allotment. The sky was black outside, and the moon shone through the crack of the window, casting shadows across the muddy mounds around the room. As always, in rare, restful moments, their conversation turned to their adventures of times past. They recalled the nettle battle, as Inkcap skipped about with his blowpipe, acting out the scenes. Scales spoke of how he couldn't believe his eyes when Inkcap had started firing his black ink capsules through the blowpipe, and General Nixus, the leader of the Nettle Army, had retreated. They never got old, their tales of Wisp and the wise old worm with his riddles and rhymes. Yet the memories saddened the two little mushy pals too, for they were once heroes with magical special powers. Each had a potence that had chosen them, given them the skills and courage to save the magical world of Mushroom Marvellous. Inkcap with his beautiful blowpipe and Scales with his impressive shielding power. At last the two teeny mushrooms grew tired, their bellies full of soothing salt cup. Their chitter-chatter slowed, and they each got themselves settled for the night. Scales lifted his heavy feet up onto the bench and rested his head down. He curled up in a ball, dazed from their evening feast, and watched Inkcap. Inkcap had fallen asleep upright in his chair. He held his blowpipe tightly in his arms. There was a knock at the door. Inkcap woke, startled. He seemed dazed for a few seconds more, but quickly snapped out of it when the knocking returned. "I've been trying to wake you," Scales said. "There's someone out the front and I didn't dare look myself." Scales nodded his cap towards the crack they had both climbed through earlier that night. Inkcap scrabbled around to find his blowpipe. It had been knocked to the floor when he awoke. He placed it back in the corner of the room and made his way to the window. Outside the night was still dark. He peered and could just make out a teeny tiny silhouette amongst the grass. "Hello?" Inkcap called. "Who's there? Who's knocking at this time of night?" And to find out who's knocking, you'll have to tune in next week. Da 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 da! Thank you so much, everyone. I haven't been able to read your comments because I've been glued to the book. But this is a beautiful book. Look at the illustrations. Aren't they gorgeous? And in this edition, they're in colour. I mean, look at the little Scales there. He's just perfect. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for all your hearts and everything. And I'll be back here same time next week, 6 o'clock, Tuesday. The following week I may have to shift it about a bit because I'm away. But then I'll be back every Tuesday for to read the whole book. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.